Hey, everybody. Welcome to Art Fight Podcast. It's Thursday, the 16th. Is that right? Yeah. Woo, I got it right. Look at that. Bastille Day came and went, people. Bastille Day came and went, and I didn't even celebrate Bastille Day on the 14th. But now it's the 16th, and, I'm on quarantine time over here. Things just sort of come and go. Everything seems kind of the same. I'm not sure what's going on. This week, we were actually supposed to have the wonderful and talented and charming actress, martial artist, broadcaster, Phoenix Carnivale was going to be with us. But lucky for her, she actually just got a new, video fitness kind of thing happening with the new company, and her filming schedule ended up getting in the way. She's recently been on a new show that's on Netflix. She's been popping up on commercials, so she's got a lot of stuff going on, and she's also a great friend of the show, and we will look forward to having her on again as soon as we can get her back on schedule with us here. Good luck to her in the meantime. Sounds like she's got a lot going on with her acting. Brian, just you and I this week, but you and I have a lot to talk about that we've been doing and that have been going on in our lives, and it just seemed like a good time to just sort of regroup, talk about UFC 251, talk about Fight Island, and also talk about all sorts of things about making art and fighting to not get killed during the pandemic.
Yeah. Hey, man. Yeah, it's been quite a trip the last couple of weeks. Yeah, I did some traveling, and it's for work, and safely. It was one of those things where there's only one way to do a gig like that, and we were able to do it. But what it meant was actually being in an RV for a week. So people have much worse situations. It was a lot of fun and a lot of hard work, but it was good. But yeah, so 251 was something. I actually just caught. Finally catch. I've been gone, so I just sort of didn't really have my finger quite on the pulse of sort of the aftermath. And I was actually particularly sort of concerned about Rose Namajunas, and how was she doing, and was she all right?
Yeah.
And kind of what was her mental state? Because it's such a weird thing, right? Like when you really dominate 2 rounds, and then get really caught several times very hard in the third, and kind of beat up pretty badly. You still get the joy of the win and the transcendence and the feeling of the win. And I'm sure for them, it's like, take it however you can get it, not a problem.
Sure.
But as a fan, and as a longtime fan of hers, especially, it's sort of, she's one of those where, for whatever reason, you irrationally, she's just such not a fragile at all. She's a powerful human, but she just seems very precious. And like, I don't know, for some reason, and this is a thing that happens, I think, a lot with any whether it's male or female, when you see somebody that's finally kind of getting hit in a way that they maybe haven't been hit before, you're gonna be a little concerned. But anyway, it was just cool to see that she was doing fine and all that. So yes, I've been kind of just reassimilating to the world. I've been what's the Joni Mitchell line? Between the white lines of the freeway.
Oh yeah.
What is that? But anyway.
I don't know. I'm thinking of the other. I'm thinking of the.
I'm thinking Coyote. Yeah.
I'm thinking of the song. What am I? There's another. But I'm thinking of Both Sides Now, which is different.
Yeah. Also very timely. But anyway, so yeah, man, and this is cool in a way that sometimes we end up not having a guest because.
Sure.
We could just kind of get a chance to catch up, because I mean, the way that things are now, under normal circumstances, we're in the studio together, we're hanging out, we have time beforehand, we have time after, and the fact that I haven't even been in the same room as you for, since whatever it was, early March,
right?
It's wild to think about, the lifetimes that have been lived since. So anyway, this is how I spend time with Sensei Joe. I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it seems like we're somehow we're still having we're still sharing these experiences. I feel like one of the real highlights of 251 that me and Antonia, my wife, were watching that together, and by the time we got to the 3rd round with Rose, like, for people who don't follow the fights or somehow didn't see her first fight with I'm blanking on her name, with Jessica Andrade. Jessica Andrade is like super powerful, stocky, get in the pocket boxer, and also a great wrestler. And in the first fight, Rose, who's a long, lean young woman, did a great job of basically fighting at range, is what we would call it, meaning that she sort of stayed away from Jessica. And every time Jessica tried to get close enough to hit her with her very short arms comparatively, or close enough to grab a hold of her so she could actually wrestle her, Rose would pepper her with shots, beautifully accurate strikes, of kicks and punches alike, and then she'd float away and she'd be out of harm's way. And that worked great for a round. And in the second round, Jessica did get a hold of her for the second time. And the second time she got a hold of her, she slammed Rose down on her head and actually knocked her unconscious and won the fight. So it was a really weird fight the first time through because Rose looked fantastic.
Yeah.
She looked incredible up until the point where she sort of, basically held on to a submission a little too long, and that's what resulted on her going head first into the canvas and going unconscious. But it's really weird when you're like clearly dominating a fight and then somehow suddenly lose a fight. So I think everybody was really hoping, people who are Rose fans, I'm a fan of Jessica's as well, but Rose is like the queen, right? So it's like I was really anxious for her to win, but this time she kind of did it a little differently. She sort of hung around a little more. She didn't just float away so frequently. She wasn't so concerned about avoiding all the damage. She seemed like she was willing to get in there and fight back a little more than she had the first time in terms of actually trading punches with Jessica. And no surprise, by the end of the fight, by the third round, I mean, I was looking at the clock going like, basically when that last minute started counting down, I was like, she's just got to survive. She has to get out of this round, and she has to not get knocked down, not get knocked out, and so she can win this fight because she had won it for sure, at that point.
Yeah.
And one would think, but by the time the fight was over, again, one of the biggest highlights of the whole night to me, which was a big night, by the way, lots to talk about. But one of the craziest things was at the very end when at the end of that fight, they announced that Rose wins. They lift Rose's hand in the air. Camera goes to like the close up of her, getting declared the winner. And here's Rose with like this big smile on her face, but also with like a jagged cut across her nose that's just bleeding down her face, and a black eye on the left side. Her left eye was just like almost shut black, and it was just a really funny juxtaposition to see her looking so happy and at the same time so obviously in need of ice and bandages.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where again, for those that are not necessarily the biggest fight fans, I think that even outside of fighting, I think that anybody can have a moment in their career or life in whatever they're interested in, whatever they're up against, where they're just not the same after a certain amount of adversity or a certain amount of a rough go at whatever your craft or your world is, and I think that can kind of go one of two ways for most people. Like, it's either something that it sticks with you in just a negative way and plants seeds of some sort of doubt that you just can't seem to shake, or it emboldens you and you feel like that you embraced the difficulty of it and the pain of it, and even if you didn't come out exactly how you hoped, you still can put it together in your mind to say, well, I'm better for this, and continue with sort of your kind of accumulation of life force or energy or power or whatever you're trying to move towards, so I think that there's kind of like one way that goes with the other. And I think that, for me, I feel like with Rose Namajunas' career, that it's been, I don't know, she's not fought in a while. She's had 2 rematches in a row. I don't know, I just kind of had this feeling. I wondered if even when she lost the belt, she's to Andrade in the first fight, she was sort of didn't really mean anything, to me. And that's just because she's on this other level as a human being, right? She gets it. She knows how you can sort of simultaneously make something very important and existentially a source of drive, but at the same time not have all your sort of identity eggs in that basket, or however you want to put it. So, but anyway, I guess my thought was, I wasn't sure after that, when she lost her title to Andrade, if that was something that would stick with her in a negative way or not. And she took a long
Right.
time off. So, that's another thing, right? People talk about ring rust or time away. And, you just feel like, too, like people at that age, when you're starting to get into your, I mean, I remember when I was in my 20s, like my early 20s were very different than my late 20s in terms of just, you start to settle into, I don't know, your frontal lobe forms or, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
And
literally your brain connects and then all of a sudden you're a different person at about 26.
You're like, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't take acid at 1:30 in the morning and I should practice, whatever my thing is.
I feel empathy.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I just wondered, with her career and the pressure that she's been under, and especially when you consider how worldly and sort of more broad her worldview is and her outlook on life and just her focus on just kind of the metaphysical and, all this. I just, she just seems to have it really together in that way. And so I just wasn't sure if she was going to come back. And if she was, I wasn't sure she was going to come back the same. So then now that she came back and then had the fight that you sort of described, I was very interested immediately to see if even like after the happiness of just getting the win, check mark, got it done, avenged my previous loss, if she would still really be vocally up for the challenge of now the title and fighting Zhang Weili and all that. And it sounds like she is. I mean, from what I see, there's no talks officially about it yet. And obviously, Rose's nose has to recover.
Right.
And she's probably going to have surgery and stuff. So anyway, it was a whole, just a...
Is there talk about her needing a surgery?
Yeah, she was saying that yesterday.
For what?
Her nose.
Oh, really? It's that bad?
It's broken, and she has a deviated
I didn't know
septum,
that.
she said.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. She was kind of saying, like, it probably would be okay without surgery if she didn't have a deviated septum, but
she does.
But she does, so it's just kind of uncomfortable or whatever,
Yeah, well, breathing.
Yeah, breathing's important.
It's a big important thing when you're fighting.
Yeah, and then one other thing that I think is side note, I just want to say that I only feel important in life in one way, and that is that about 10 years ago, I followed Rose Namajunas on Instagram, and she followed me back when it didn't mean as much, of course, because she was not famous yet. But she hasn't unfollowed me, and I really appreciate that.
That's good. You got to jump in those DMs and get her on the show, bro.
I know, man. Yeah. So anyway, and the other thing that she said in this Helwani interview that I thought was of particular note, that probably you would have more insight on than me, was she was saying, she was talking about sort of the juxtaposition of Trevor Whitman as a coach and Pat Barry as a coach, and how that works for her and how she puts all that together. And the way she put it was generally that to make them all work together, it's great because Trevor Whitman is more boxing focused, MMA boxing, but boxing focused. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, Pat Barry is, pure kickboxer, and that whole sort of stand your ground mantra that, that he was telling her in the corner the other night, and
right,
still kind of talking about that, like that was really the key, and that was more of a kickboxing sort of a mentality. And so, but she's found some way to weave it together, which is of course the beauty of MMA in general.
Sure.
And so it was interesting to sort of get a sense of how you can have different coaches that have different expertise levels, and you figure out how to not hierarchically assign them necessarily, but to blend them.
Right. Yeah. No. It's definitely an interesting thing with her, and it's an interesting thing in MMA in general, because I just feel like because MMA encompasses so many separate skill sets, it's that the training aspect of it makes it very different from like boxing. You know what I mean? That's one of the things that I think, you'll see a boxer have a coach and a team, and that's just their coach and their team. And if they're being successful and their career's heading in the right direction, you'll see a boxer hang out with his coach and his team for years and years and years, Yeah. But in MMA, it's not uncommon to see fighters moving around more, and like in her case, Pat Barry is actually also her fiance. So, they're in the same corner, day in and day out. Right. Mm-hmm. So she's not going anywhere in terms of Pat Barry, but the idea that a fighter might, decide that, oh, my jujitsu just isn't where it needs to be. And, somebody reached out to me and, called me, at home and, asked, invited me to come down to, the Gracie Gym in New York, or, asked me to come out to the West Coast and train with, black belt surfing and Brian Ortega and all those guys, whatever. Like, it's not uncommon for MMA people. And some people are very, vago when it comes to their just train all, wherever. And then you have people like Tony Ferguson, who's like, I'm going to build a training place for myself on a mountain, and I'm going to go away like some weird kung fu film and just go into some mysterious thing that nobody really understands. So that's one of the things that's really rich about MMA, I think, is just the various ways that people prepare for this crazy, melange of different sports, because it really is a combination of not just like kickboxing, but like boxing and kickboxing and wrestling and submission grappling of all different kinds, and you saw in the fight the other night with Paige VanZant and tell me the Brazilian girl's name. Rebus, is that her last name?
Amanda Rebus.
Amanda Rebus. There we go. I don't think if I've seen her fight before, I wasn't. It was before people were talking about her, and I wasn't that aware. I think I've seen a few of her earlier fights, but again, like on an undercard or something like that. But when she fought Paige VanZant the other night, one of the things I loved, and which I always love to see in MMA, was she threw, I think at least once, but I think twice, she did a couple of really cool judo throws where she like basically got VanZant into like essentially like a front, not a front headlock, but into like a headlock position, and then was able to throw her right over her hip. And you don't see that a lot in MMA, but when you do see it, it's so rad, So there's sort of like no limit. Or like Tony Ferguson, who I just mentioned, is one of the guys who, for sure, definitely actually shows you that you can incorporate all sorts of kung fu, movement and stuff into this sport, and it's valid and it works. So I that's one of the reasons why that sport, just is endlessly fascinating to me from the beginning, was just seeing how all these different pieces can fit together, and seeing how certain fighters pick and choose what they want and then figure out how to incorporate it, and who to go to learn more about it and all that stuff. So that I'm very fascinated by all that under the hood stuff.
I'll tell you what, if it tells you anything, Amanda Rebus tossing Paige VanZant in that way, if it tells you anything, what it tells you is, like, what I was getting from it, at least at the time, and this is all subjective. I don't really, I'm not an expert, but what I have picked up over many years of listening to other experts is that if you do throw someone in that way, because it's similar to what Rousey would do often.
Yeah, totally.
But the thing
also is, judoka.
Yeah. And the thing is that generally is something you can't do. You can't do that to everyone. If somebody is an incredibly skilled grappler, if you're gonna toss someone in that way, you're really at risk of giving up your back to that person.
Right. Totally.
And so, if it said anything to me, for Rebus to pitch VanZant down in that way, what it told me was, Amanda Rebus does not give a shit about Paige VanZant's grappling skills or anything, and just held her there. It really was like a sort of a big sister, little sister kind of fight. I mean, and for Paige VanZant to have, I don't know, she seems like she's in some other place. I don't know what she's actually about or whatever, and that's fine. I don't really care. But she's got a lot of other things where she can make more money and does so. And so I feel like she's just sort of half in, half out anyway.
Right. While you were on the road, I did a little meetup with Nancy Kidder and some of our, comrades who do that stuff with Nancy. And for guests,
are you eating right now?
No, not exactly.
Okay. What is going on over there? You realize I'm just looking at you from the waist up, so I don't know what the hell is happening right now.
It's okay. Everything's fine. When we were this was right before 251 took place, and so Nancy Kidder, for people who are familiar with the podcast, know she's a professor at American University who does a course called Writing and Fighting, where they basically use combat sports as a jumping off point to do an English class, essentially. And she has been really great about sort of looping together lots of people in the MMA media for lots of Zoom meetings and really interesting sort of like conference calls and stuff that we've done. And a bunch of us got on a Zoom call with her right before 251 and just sort of just had kind of a happy hour together and talked about 251. And we talked about Paige VanZant, and I was saying that there was something, I can't remember, I think it was Dan Hardy was talking about Paige, and he said, she was somebody who started off as an MMA fighter who became a celebrity, and now she's sort of more like a celebrity who also fights.
Yeah.
And was talking about the fact that really that kind of a model is actually a better model for a different promotion like Bellator or something like that, where she could possibly end up. At the same time, I mean, like you say, I'm not sure, first of all, losing that fight the way she did, I don't think it was a surprise. And at the same time, even if it wasn't a surprise, it doesn't really help you get a great contract from another promotion if she ends up having to leave the UFC. It certainly doesn't give her any leverage with the UFC.
Yeah, to be disposed of in that way.
Yeah. So I feel
Not
like,
and
we're talking about a first round loss, right? Is that correct? Yeah. So I mean, it was a fast thing, and like you say, the manner in which it went down. For people who aren't familiar with the mechanics of this kind of a thing, imagine grabbing your little brother in a headlock, right? And then you flip him over your hips so that when he lands on his back, your back is on his chest, essentially. And when your back is on his chest like that, if you know anything about jiu-jitsu, it's a perfect opportunity for your little brother then to reach up and grab your neck, for instance, and choke you out. I mean, it's exactly just sitting there waiting for you to do that if you're not careful and if you don't actually land it right and transition to a new position quickly and all this stuff. And that is why, as you say, in the early days of women's MMA, Ronda Rousey could do this to anybody. But in the place we're in now, it can be very dangerous, even with average level UFC fighters, because everybody knows if you land on my chest with your back, oh, I can just grab you. You know what I mean? And now all of a sudden you're fighting off a submission, and it doesn't matter if you threw me. You just essentially threw me into a better position than I was in when I was in a standing headlock. So I just think, I don't know what happens with her. And like you say, on some level, she's somebody, if you're a big fan of combat sports, she's somebody who, is not necessarily taken, very seriously anymore. But I also felt that, her run in the UFC has been an interesting one. She has been surprising every now and then. She's a very athletic girl for sure. And she's not just a slouch.
And she's proven some serious toughness. I mean,
100%.
I mean, I hate to say that, like, she's had the shit beaten out of her many times, but she has. But in a way where she still put up a fight and proved herself as a determined competitor in a true way. So I don't mean to downplay that, and she's had her moments.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And she came out of a gym called Alpha Male, which is a gym in California that's definitely one of the premier, it's one of the places that really built the sport. So she wasn't just coming out of some silly place with no real coaching or anything like that. She was about as legit as she was able to actually be. You know what I mean? So it's just a thing where at the end of the day, I think sometimes she gets a bad rap in a way because she also proved to be, a charismatic, pretty young woman who quickly turned her small amount of MMA experience into an Instagram career and a Dancing with the Stars career and all these things that made her a bigger star than the MMA people thought she was in the sport, which of course was true, but she's obviously bigger than the sport and maybe will just leave the sport. Who knows?
It's interesting that because we didn't really talk. We just knew that we were going to talk about 251 on this episode for at least some period of time. We didn't talk about what sequence or what fights we would focus on or anything like that. We just wanted to kind of vamp on it and talk about what was interesting. I think it's interesting in retrospect already that we have not even mentioned anyone but female fighters.
Yeah, I mean, like we say on this podcast more than once. I mean, I feel like really in a lot of ways I find the female fighters to be some of the most interesting, and in some of the ways we're talking about. Like, for instance, last night there was a fight with Molly McCann, and man, I'm not going to remember her name because this was rather new. She's rather new to the UFC, but a Brazilian fighter who actually has like a 15-1 record. I think it's 16-1 after last night's win, but her record in the UFC is only like 2 or 3 wins, right? I don't have any of these names, offhand. But that fight was one that was, it was interesting. Molly is kind of a fan favorite, who's actually been on a small winning streak, but she was sort of outsized and ultimately kind of outclassed last night by someone who is just a longer, leaner, reachier kickboxer. You know what I mean? Really, really kind of very elegant sort of knees and stuff. Really, really beautiful movement on her feet, but then even better movement on the ground when it came to like her jujitsu and whatnot. But in the middle of the fight, one of the commentators made the point that they're kind of commenting on, well, this person did this and this person did that, and then somebody popped in and said, yeah, but like neither of them looks like they're slowing down at all. Like they've just been going at it hard. And it's like at that point, I think it was toward the end of the second round or something. And I think that's one of the real hallmarks of women's fighting that we didn't see at the beginning of men's fighting. Part of it because at the beginning of men's fighting in the UFC, it was all heavier weight classes, right? Which are, big, heavy dudes who are prone to explosive movements and then periods of exhaustion, right? Because they're moving a lot of weight around. But I also think there's something just about the mechanics of men and women where in women's fighting, man, you just don't see women hanging on each other trying to get their breath. It just never happens.
Yeah.
They're just smashing each other. I mean, it's one of the hallmarks of women's fighting, I think, is that capacity for physical endurance. And along with that, it's unsettling at times because socially speaking, we don't want to see women getting smashed. You know what I mean? There's just something about seeing a guy get his nose broken doesn't bother us as much as seeing a woman get her nose broken.
Yeah.
But they also, many of these women in these, not every woman in the world perhaps, but certainly these women in this milieu, have an undeniable capacity for toughness as well, So I think, and we also have the benefit of seeing women sort of developing a style of MMA after the men have come through and created a lot of the wheels. You don't have to reinvent how kickboxing works in MMA. We've figured that out. At least as men, they've figured it out. Now as women, they can just grab that baton and alter it and change it as they need to for their own sakes, but they don't have to figure it out in the first place. So we're seeing the evolution happen so much faster.
I wonder what that's about, in terms of like how I guess it's sort of our primordial sort of caveman, tendencies, or just thinking about why is it that it is tougher to see a woman get punched in the face, right? I mean,
I think it's sociological more than anything.
You think so? Yeah.
I think you could be in a different culture where it wouldn't bother you as much. I think because obviously they can take it. You know what I mean? So why does it bother us? And I just had the girl who, the young lady who fought Molly McCann, was Talia Santos, and I'm sorry I didn't get her name happening first. I do literally no research when we do this. I just start talking, and then I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's why we put the word art first in the podcast name as opposed to fight. We're not if you want actual information, go somewhere else, man.
We get to it eventually, but I have to stop and look it up. But Talia Santos looked fantastic last night, and I did remember Jessica Andrade's name, so I'm doing pretty great. Yeah.
I bet one of Nancy's students over there at American University has had to have written a paper on this issue of sort of the sociological sort of underpinnings of, like what. How about this? Like, in a perfect world, if there is equality at some point, which we know that there's not, but people are working together to try to get there. If there is equality, would it be fair to say at that point that one indicator that there is some sort of I'm not saying it's the deciding factor, but maybe just one in the constellation of factors would be that feeling maybe in a couple of generations goes away, and that there's not people feeling more sorry for a woman getting punched in the face than a man. That's I don't know.
It could, or it's going to go the other way, and everybody's going to feel bad about anybody being punched in the face, and we won't, and it'll just be an art podcast.
Right. Everybody just take your gloves and go home. We don't do this anymore. Remember back when they would actually have competitive.
Do you remember when they used to do that? It was horrible.
This guy had an island, and that's all it was for.
And they fought on an island. It was so gross. I'm thinking of our friend Georgia when I say these words.
Yeah. So
it's so wrong. How do you watch that?
Yo. So yeah. One of the other things, actually, I always try to remind anybody that sort of questions, like, hey, why are you into that stuff? Or that seems weird, or whatever, fighting. There were a couple of examples that I think are good reasons as to why, or how I function with it, or how it works for me. Is for instance, all these fights happened during a pandemic. They all had to endure quarantines and checks and testing and all of this to get themselves to fly, whatever it was, 13 hours to Abu Dhabi to, all of a sudden be on an inverted sleep schedule. It's 159 degrees outside, or God knows whatever it is there, and they're all stuck in a room. If they do get out, it's not for very long, or what, just everything about being a fighter, from what I've gathered, and just for any practice. If you're an artist, you develop your rituals and your habits and the times that you work best, or whatever it is. Everybody's got their way, and so it's kind of like if you're a musician in a band and you're used to playing gigs at night, and then all of a sudden you got to get on a plane, fly 13 hours somewhere, and play a gig at 7 o'clock in the morning. And have your energy and your wherewithal and feel like you're on top of your game. I see all that. I saw all the fighters sort of how they were, reconciling with all those challenges, and the uncertainty also of the, how safe is this going to be, and, all that. And, so like when I'm out on my, my journey that I did in the past week, doing a bunch of drone work for a film project, I'm out in just incredibly tough conditions in the deep south. It's super hot. It's very unfriendly conditions, and I'm in a place where I don't want to. It's really weird to be in the position where I don't want to draw any attention to myself for my own safety. I don't want people approaching me or harassing me or anything. But at the same time, I have to fly a huge drone lawnmower in the sky that does nothing but attract attention and curiosity and questions. And I had to do it on college campuses. I had to do it in residential areas. I had to do it in a bunch of different places for this film. So, I think about that, like how I get inspired by seeing, it's like if these people can fly to Abu Dhabi against coronavirus and their schedules and their way of doing things and come out unscathed and successful in any way on the other side, like I can endure these discomforts that I'm dealing with in my idiom or my craft or whatever it is that I'm doing. It's not that big of a deal. So I borrow a lot of inspiration, I think, from the things that fighters put up with, that is not just the difficulty of the fight itself.
Yeah, I mean, there's something inspiring about it. I mean, there's something inspiring about all of it all the time anyway, but it's definitely, I mean, I got to tell you, when this all first started and they're talking about doing all these fights during this time, it just seems so hubristic and just so dumb and arrogant and stupid. And now it may still be all those things where it has yet to really be seen. But so far, there hasn't been a whole lot of evidence that, there's been a lot of comment that says, hey, they're actually doing this really carefully in terms of keeping people quarantined and, at bay and testing and all this stuff. and separating everybody during the events as much as possible. Obviously the two fighters can't be separated at the event, but they've been thoroughly tested and quarantined before this. So that seems to be working. And I'm just saying that at this point I definitely am happy to be able to see the fights and look forward to the fights, and it was even fun even last night, watching the sort of less star-studded card in the middle of the week. Was still entertaining, saw some good action, and really enjoyed it. But I wanted to get back to you talking about what you've been doing. When I was talking with Nancy and our little group before 251, Kyle Green, our buddy on Twitter, was one of our friends who was there, in that meeting talking about all the fights and stuff. Yeah. And Kyle is also a scholar who
sociologist as well, right?
That's right. Yeah. Who's interested in combat sports, and I messaged him after and said, he should really come on the show. So maybe we can get him on soon and talk to our audience about what he does, because it's pretty fascinating. Yeah. He's a pretty eloquent guy. I'm sure he's an elegant man as well, but a very thoughtful, dude who seems to have a lot of interesting insights into the kind of stuff that we talk about. But I mentioned that you weren't in the call because you were out on the road, and he immediately chimed in, and he had been paying attention to the fact that you were doing this project that had to do with an NBA basketball player. Do you want to share a little bit about that? Can you? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
yeah, I mean, in general, I
just did though.
No, I think it's probably fine. I mean, I don't think it's gonna.
I think it's interesting, and people probably would like to know a little bit about why are you traveling around in an RV with a drone in the middle of
Yeah, right. Well, no, so it's a really neat document series project. I'm not sure where it's going to be happening. It's not my project, right? I was sort of just hired to work as essentially crew on the project. It's a company out of LA that's doing it, and they're just hiring. They just basically hired me to go do the drone work for it. But it's interesting how it all came about, so I'll talk about it for a little bit. But so the way this started was, and this is the, I think this might have some helpful, any artists that are listening or watching, any creatives. I think that what I experienced in this project is something that we all hope to experience, and you have to kind of set yourself up for that, and you plant seeds for things to happen, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, but when they do, it's really validating. So anyway, I'll get to actual specificity here. So I got contacted by someone that had seen some of my drone film work online, and they said, wow, what you're doing is really different. It's more perhaps artistic or creative or sublime in its pace, or some element about it, whatever it is. There's something about it that's really cool. We will are doing a documentary on a subject, an NBA player that plays for the Memphis Grizzlies, and the player is Ja Moran, who's a phenom and just a really amazing kid, and a really great story. And they said, look, we're doing this thing on Ja Morant, and they said, we love the footage that you already have of Memphis that I found online. Can we license some of that? And then also, would you be willing to go shoot some more stuff for us in your style and in your way? And so those conversations evolved to essentially following Ja Morant's roots. So he is from originally Dalzell, South Carolina, which is sort of towards the coast, pine country for sure. And then not far from there is Sumter, South Carolina. So he's sort of from that area originally. So I was not the first stop, but one of the stops was to go to where his house was in rural South Carolina, where his father had built him a basketball court in the backyard and was the practice spot for 30, 40 kids at all times. And they ran ran this kind of basketball operation out of the backyard. And Ja Morant's story is also interesting because he was very overlooked and undersized by recruiters. He was he was like 5'7" when he was in college, and he just didn't have the full athletic ability I think that was needed by scouts. Or I guess maybe that was for his college recruitment. So anyway, big tractor tires there for him to jump on and get his vertical improved and all that. So there's that sort of scene there in South Carolina. Then in Memphis, where he plays, right? He plays at the Forum. There's a lot of scenery there. I wanted to capture the. So part of what my assignment was also like sort of going and finding interesting basketball courts just in the city, and then
that's cool.
And just doing sort of artistic filming of using a drone of these basketball courts. And so I did a lot of research ahead of time, Google Earth and everything else to sort of find.
Oh, that's rad.
Yeah, just to find these spots, and then kind of built a whole shot list that's like a progressive shot list in Google Earth. And it just takes me to each location. So anyway, and then Murray State in Kentucky is where he went to college. So I had to go up there and film the campus and some other things up there, and also some basketball courts and other scenes or things that they needed for their document series. And so anyway, it's a really neat project, really neat kid, really neat story, and it was, I think, if anything, just really interesting to. And so the thing is like, how the hell am I going to do this? Typically, I would just go stay in a hotel, go to the next location, stay in a hotel or whatever. But during this Corona situation, I was just like, man, like, we're on the super safe side, probably more than most people. I don't go inside. We haven't been inside really anywhere since all this started. Like, we'll do.
That's smart.
Because that's where the problem is, as far as I see it. I mean, I'm not saying there's not problems in other ways, but
hell is other people for real now.
Yeah, that's right. I know, God. And so it's Kafka, right? Or no, Dostoevsky. Yeah, sorry. So anyway, I was hoping that this production company would be amenable, but I just said, look, the only way I can do this, man, and I feel even remotely good about it, and it's still sketchy to me, because if we break down or we have some scenario, like, there could be any number of problems that come up that sort of expose us in some way. But they were cool with it. So I rented an RV for a week, and we just stayed at state parks, and it was actually, cheaper than staying in a hotel, and or not cheaper, but like, maybe the same price or a little bit cheaper.
Yeah. How much is it for a hookup? Like $50? Is it that much?
What do you mean for a hookup? Like a campsite?
I mean, did you have to like have a hookup for the RV, like so you could have electricity and whatnot? Or
yeah, I mean, yeah. So you don't really have to, but it's super nice if you can, and all the state parks have them. So all the state parks we stayed at, the hookup, it's a camp there. It includes everything, and it was like, usually between $15 and $25 a night.
That's great.
Yeah, and honestly, like, it's one of those things too where it's like, why is this not like, this is how this should all be done. Like I would much rather be doing this than be in a hotel any day of any kind. I don't care how nice the hotel is. Okay, maybe it's some, in the future, but I'm not, like, hotels are the worst places to be right now. Airbnbs, there's not a lot of assurances there. It's just not safe. And I wasn't going to take any chances. So we got an RV, rented it, sterilized the hell out of it, packed it up, and got on the road. And we just, and it has a generator too. So when I'm out on shoots, I can still charge all my batteries and all my gear and all that. And I had, mobile internet. We had like a little production studio on wheels. I was able to upload footage as I did it. And it was just really cool. So overall, neat story. But the part of that I just wanted to kind of relate maybe to sort of artists or whatever is like, the thing that brought this company to me to bring me this sort of really cool, fun, interesting gig that I would never have had otherwise, not necessarily one from my sort of network or normal operations, is because I just made stuff that I wanted to make and just put it out there to put it out there and made it discoverable. And then that is how somebody found my work and said, we want that. Like, there was none of this. I had the trust of the director and everybody involved right away, and they said, just do, I'm going to tell you some things, like, it'd be great if we could get shots of this and that and the other, but just ultimately just do what you do.
That's rad.
Yeah. And so then when you're shooting, you're not feeling like you have this pressure to see it
boxes.
Yeah. Or to see it through their eyes. I mean, it's a little bit of the tick boxes in the sense that you want to get certain locations and things that are just sort of the bread and butter of the logistics of scene editing, in terms of like, you have to get a shot of the water tower that says the name of the town on it, or like stuff that I don't necessarily find that interesting, but you kind of, when you think about what it's functionally serving to hold up dialogue or to create a setting, in a documentary series.
Establish a location.
Yeah, it's just like that's the bread and butter, that kind of thing, whether you like it or not. Like, it's not an experimental documentary on an NBA player, right? It's a high, like a good budget project and legit project. So anyway, but I just thought it was interesting for that reason, that they found me in the way that they did. I also found it interesting that I was sort of thinking of, as I was pulling my gear through swamps and mud and, getting eaten alive by things and sweating so much that I can't even see my drone. And, just all of like, this is really hard right now. I think about like fighters and what they go through and how much they put on the line, and it makes my life seem a little bit more palatable and easy. And then the last thing that was just interesting about the trip that I'll say is just that my grandfather, he was in the Air Force, and he was last stationed at Shaw Air Force Base, which is right in the area where I was filming. And so for me to film there, I had to get a waiver and an authorization from the FAA, and then talk to the air traffic control people and let them know 3 days out that I'm coming. Here's the radius I'll be flying. Here's the altitude I'll be flying. Here's my information. I won't be filming any military operations. And then you call like the day of, so I'm having to deal with the tower of the Air Force Base that my grandfather was last stationed at and, flew in and out of. And then,
that's rad.
And then on top of that, I told my mom that I was going there, and I didn't even know this, but my mother and father in 1966 were married at this Air Force Base. So,
really?
Yeah. So it was just this strange convergence of kind of. I found it novel that I was doing this. I couldn't help but think about how strange it was that I'm going to the backyard court, and I'm tracing roots all over the Southeast of this young man's story, and going to all these locations that have been part of his story and part of his origin. And I'm thinking about how interesting that is, that I've never met this guy, but I can tell you very like minute little details about his home, or like not inside, but like the yard and the situation out there and everything. I thought it was interesting that I was just following this guy's story, and I don't know him. Like, what a weird thing. And then I realized also, as I was learning more about my ties to that area, that I was in a weird way kind of participating in my own part of my own sort of origin story. So it was
interesting.
Yeah, it was just sort of a neat little. Are
you going to get signed to the Grizzlies?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. But I'll tell you what, though, this kid. I feel like I'm old enough to just talk about people that are under 21 as kids. Is that okay?
Oh, sure.
I don't want to be that guy. He's a young man. He's a man. But this kid, he's just. I mean, go look at the highlights of Ja Morant from his rookie season with the Memphis Grizzlies on YouTube. It is out of control. Like, this kid is really, really special. And when you get a sense, yeah. And so, and like, when we were there filming, his family's all around there, and family's a huge part of his life and his story. Like his aunt drove by. Who are you guys? What do you do? Oh, right. They told me you were, everywhere we went, and any family that we sort of met from a distance, people were so sweet, so kind. Like, I think it was probably maybe his nephew or his little brother. I'm out there in their yard filming the backyard court at his new house. It's like a much nicer court. And I'm just dying. And this kid couldn't have been more than 15, just comes walking way, it's a huge area. He comes walking way out to me with this ice cold bottle of water, and just sets it down. You could tell they were just like, this guy looks like he's a wreck, but it was just, I was really touched by it, right? Because these people are really, I got a real sense of his family and his ethos and kind of what he's about, and he's not above things. And then lastly, I was just looking today, apparently what's happening in the NBA bubble right now that they have in Orlando is a lot of the higher end players or whatever. Rajon Rondo's complaining about his hotel room and likening it to a Motel 6. Meanwhile, like anybody from the free world otherwise, is going to look at that and be like, dude, you have a really nice hotel room. I know you're sacrificing other things to be in this quarantine, essentially, to do all this, but like, you're not, like, this is not suffering. So, calm down. And John Morant had put out a thing, that just said his quote on the matter that, when they were asking, I guess, players about whether they were happy with everything and trying to get people to complain, I think, the media. And John Morant he just said something along the lines of like, I'm not a silver spoon kind of guy. This is great. I'm fine with my room. I'm fine with the food. I'm fine with whatever, kind of like we just have work to do and we're fine. It's fine,
Yeah, that's great.
And so anyway, it's a very strange way to get to know the locations and the sort of ethereal sort of essence of someone without having any sense of who they are as a person, having met them in person. But,
right.
This is a strange
and
thing.
You've met his extended family.
Yeah,
you talked to him.
Yeah, so it was, but anyway, so it was a really cool experience and a very hard one. It was some of the hardest filming I've ever done. Anyway, so I would love to tell people like, and it's going to come out on this and it's going to be that. I have no idea. It's not really my project. I will say that the director he did the AJ1 documentary, which is the Air Jordan 1 documentary, which is fantastic. It's just it's going to be great. And these guys make incredible documentary work in that sphere. So super honored to be a part of it. I kind of want to go back. You know how it is like when you do something, Joe, where you do a gallery show or you do your own pieces or you go on a photography thing and you get stuff together. There's just that, how do you get past this, right? Like this feeling of no matter what it is that you do, you're going to beat yourself up about it on some level. I could have done better, shoulda, coulda, woulda. Man, if I could just go back to that location again, I would know exactly how to shoot that or, but under sort of the duress of the moment, that was the best that I could sort of see or come up with, or I didn't know any better. Or if I just would have been more patient or, I'm so like, I go back and study my footage and just get so mad, because I'm such a weird kind of perfectionist about what I'm doing. And I'm never happy with it. I mean, there'll be moments that I'm like, yeah, that's pretty awesome, but generally I'm just do you beat yourself up, Joe? Because I beat myself up.
I do sometimes. I remember when I was doing a photo essay of Nolensville Pike, which for people who don't know, for people who don't know, I do quite a bit of street photography, and Nolensville Pike is a very long road, very dense commercial road in the South Nashville neighborhood of Nashville. And I think that I ended up, when I did that, I was doing it as an assignment for the WPLN Nashville Public Radio website. So it was a photo essay that they ended up publishing on their website. And we did a whole little radio program about it, kind of documenting the process of taking these photographs and whatnot. And when I did that, I remember, after we got everything done, I was turning in my invoices and I got an email or a phone call from somebody. And they were sort of like just asking me about like all these miles I was claiming on my invoice. And I had to sort of explain myself and say that I had driven down to Nolensville. I think I'd driven down to Nolensville Pike and driven up and down Nolensville Pike like 4 times before I finally just quit doing it. Yeah. And part of it was because there were certain things that I found down there that, when I'm doing this stuff, I do it very just au naturel. I don't have any lights or any tricks or anything, so I'm just strictly, whatever anybody might see at that same moment with whatever camera they might have, they could possibly be taking the exact same photo I would be taking. So if I found certain things, basically it was the biggest problem was lighting, because I kept on coming across things that I wanted to get under better lighting circumstances or better angles or whatever. And when one thing's on the east side of the street or the west side of the street, it's totally different. The time of the day is totally different. So there was one thing in particular, there was a sculpture at a gallery down there that I was trying to shoot over this fence because it almost looked like a monster coming out of the water, essentially, when you saw this thing over this fence. It was like this really cool thing. But I just could not get it the way I wanted to because of the sun. And so dumb things like that I kept on like insisting on not having any capacity to manipulate, but also insisting that it had to be exactly the way I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And I just kept going back. It was also a factor of that place was so, again, it's just so dense with signage and activity and, all sorts of stuff going on the streets down there that it really took me to doing it that many times before I finally decided that I had somehow been able to represent it as it actually was with like 20 photographs. I had to take 80 or 90 or 100. I don't even know how many I took before I finally was like, okay, this is representative of the experience of this space, which is, which is a very intense, visually intense place. So yeah, in that sense, I definitely, I definitely find myself being a perfectionist. I mean, I kind of do it with a little bit of everything, writers are famous for the idea that you're somehow like, procrastinating to the last minute of your deadline before you get your act together and, spit out your writing. And that can be true. But generally speaking, for me, it's like by the time something's due, I've already written it and have been editing it so that by the time I hand it in, it's pretty damn tight. You know what I mean? And that's just a factor of, I don't want it to not be that way. You know what I mean? I want to make sure it's good to go before I hand it off to an editor, and not just for their convenience, but just for my own sanity. Because if something pops up, in an article or something that doesn't make any sense or is weirdly worded or is like, even factually wrong or something, that drives me insane, so
Yeah.
It's one of the hard things about when you're actually getting interviewed or there's something actually about your work, the same thing bothers me, but you can't let it bother you in that case, because you just have to let it go. And it's one of those things where it's like, hey, well, I'm in the paper, I don't care.
Yeah. I've been acknowledged in some way as being alive and doing something. That's pretty good.
Right.
Just let it.
Speaking of it, really quick, speaking of acknowledging people and keeping our facts straight, the quote "hell is other people" is actually from the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre.
Oh yeah.
In his play No Exit, one of the characters says, "Hell is no people, or hell is other people," acknowledging our inability to escape the watchful gaze of everyone around us. So there we go. There's a little existentialism for you on a Thursday afternoon, everybody.
God, I just blew that completely.
You're pretty close. Dostoevsky, also an existentialist. You just had the wrong country.
Yeah. Gosh.
Those Russian existentialists are a whole other flavor.
I have way too much natural sort of intrinsic alignment with a lot of those outlooks.
Right, Kafka as well. You mentioned him too. So you were hovering right around it, Brian. I think that was calling it like,
Look at that. It's like in the music world. If you were just, it's like in the music world. If you were like, 38 Special. No, Leonard Skinner. No. It's the Allman Brothers, idiot.
Long-haired Southern guy.
Well, we should probably get out of here. But is there anything that you have, Joe, before we head on, that you wanna drop?
I don't, it's interesting. I'm not sure what's going on. I would like the journalist in me would love to tell people, especially people here in Nashville, whether or not there will be a formal virtual art crawl this month. They've been doing a thing where in Nashville, instead of our actual art crawl event, where we have a bunch of galleries open new shows on the first Saturday of every month, and that's really the sort of night that that's the night when we usually go out to see art shows. The East Nashville does one of their own usually on the second Saturday. So those are, events that we normally looked forward to before March. But all the galleries dealing with First Saturday have been sort of creating a virtual experience by all creating videos of the shows they're doing and then putting those all together into one big presentation. That the last time they did it, they even had like a musical performance. It was really kind of a fun thing to watch. And so instead of going out on the town at 6:00 on a Saturday night, you can go to the Nashville Gallery Association's YouTube page and then that's a video that like is, you know, just kind of hanging out there and doesn't actually go. You can't actually view it until 6 o'clock on Saturday night. So it's about, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it sort of stinks because it just makes you remember that you wish you were out actually doing this stuff. But it's still been a pretty fun thing to do on Saturdays. But when all the protests and everything broke loose in early June, they decided to not they just canceled it for that first Saturday in June. And then on June 20th, they went ahead and said, okay, let's go ahead and release it now. Like it's a better time. It's not such a crazy sensitive time. I mean, Nashville's courthouse building was getting burned down. It just seemed like a crazy time to be asking people to look at gallery videos. But then because it was released so late, they didn't do it they didn't have anything in July. And I was, you know, curious as to whether they were going to bother doing it anymore at all. I wasn't sure what the consensus was. And as of right now, I'm talking to a bunch of different galleries and trying to find out if that's something they're actually going to do, or are some of the galleries just going to put out their own videos. So I'm not sure what's going to happen here in Nashville in August, except for the fact that I know for sure that the Red Arrow Gallery in East Nashville is going to open a new show. And I will actually have a piece of work in that show. And I'm sure on some level they will do something to make that available for people to see. I would think that they'll probably do their own video, even if it's not part of a larger video art crawl or virtual art crawl. But I can let people know as we get closer to that. I've actually been working on a painting for this piece. It's kind of a multimedia piece. I can't make myself make a thing. I just always end up having to make it be many things at once. But I'm almost done with it. Speaking of perfection, I'm almost done with it. Today I was counting up every time I do another layer on this thing, I take another photo, and I've missed a couple, but I've gotten at least 13 photos. I think that means I've actually been working like different layers of this thing like about 15 times. So it's getting pretty crazy. But the show is called Breathless, and it's basically sort of a response to the tornado we've had in Nashville, the pandemic that we've experienced here in Nashville, the way we've experienced here, and also the experience of all the Black Lives Matter protests that we've had here in Nashville. There's been an ongoing occupation at our legislative plaza here in an effort to remove some Confederate statuary from the Capitol building. So we've got our own version of that story going on down here. And so all the work in the show is going to be reflections of that in one way or another. It's a big group show of gallery artists. So I'm excited to be a part of it. I've still got some work to do before I get this thing finished, but it's going to be a fun thing to be a part of. And when we move forward in the next few weeks, I can give people more details about that. I've also got some music that I just got done. I had a couple of songs that were sort of semi-produced, but I recently teamed up with my buddy Jeff Brown, who's a fantastic drummer here in town, and he has a setup at his house where he can just do his own drum tracks on whatever you send him. So my friend Andrew Adkins had produced some songs for me. We mailed them over to Jeff, and Jeff put his drum kit on them. They had just had electric drums that I had recorded to. So Jeff put his full kit on these, and then when he got them back, Andrew got a bunch of ideas that he wanted to add. So we put some bass and organ and all sorts of stuff on these. And one of the songs is something that for the time being, I'm planning to just be pitching to some people. And then the other song is probably going to be my first single of this year, which is called Lone Wolves Together. So that'll be coming out soon, but there'll be more news about that in a bit. I'm just listening to it right now and still kind of wondering at like how we can actually do this, just mail these sessions around to each other.
No,
and you live in a place like Nashville and people have these amazing home studios and they're these incredibly talented musicians, and you can just do this. And it's something that back in 2008, when I made a record back then, I had a guitar player who's my guitar player again still, but now he's back in Nashville. But at that time he was living in Chicago. And I remember when we were getting ready to make that record, it was, it's 12 years ago now, and it was a bit of a bigger deal to get set up between us and Chicago
Yeah.
to make sure we were going to be able to do exactly this.
Stuff works
And
now.
yeah, it worked great then too. I mean, it worked out okay, but it was a bit of a bigger deal, and now it's just effortless. I mean, it's nobody even really has to think about it. It's just like, yeah, man, send me your stems. You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah.
mean? And so then it's just that's it. So it's been kind of fun. I just was in touch with Jeff today and making sure we, got our business all taken care of and everything. But he's a fantastic drummer, and it's been kind of fun to be working on a music project with my buddies again, because it's been a while. I've got an album project that's just on the back burner again because we can't all get in the studio to mix it together. But I sort of don't want to. That's the kind of one of my favorite parts of that process. And it's like, bro, do not finish this without me being in that room and being able to like actually sort of just dive into the fun of mixing a project.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the best thing.
It's a confirmation of the vibe.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And it's just so much fun to that that last step when you're just fine tuning everything. And it's such a gratifying part of the process versus like the tracking process, which I find to be such a grind in a lot of ways. It can also be full of magic and wonder, but it also is it's the really fun part is when you just get to be just ears and faders and knobs, and you're just like, woo, and also too, every now and then a new idea and grab a thing and make a noise, and it's so great.
Like the idea of like it's like framing a house, like putting a foundation in and framing a house versus like actually
interior decorating,
doing finishes and decorating. Yeah,
it's really fun to just hang all the little baubles around. So anyway, but it's been, I've been able to get some of this work ready for this gallery show, and actually hopefully have some music that I'm about to release. So that's all really good. And I think anybody, if you're able to do any of these things at any level right now and stay productive in any way, that's great. If it's too much to bear, or if your financial situation or your familiar situation or your domestic situation makes all that stuff hard, I would say just try to exercise and eat healthy and get some sunshine and stay ready for when you're able to get back on track.
I hear you. Well, man, it's good to be back. I don't like missing a week, I feel like we always have a pretty good rhythm, even with the with the chaos. I think we do pretty well. We are approaching our episode 100, so we're gonna have to think.
Yeah. Did we say this is 97, by the way?
Yeah, this is 97. So
it's amazing.
Yeah. So happy about that. So yeah, that's basically it, everybody. Joe, you can be found at Mighty Joe Nolan. I can be found at Those Drones. And you can see this episode if you're listening, or you can listen if you're seeing, or you can follow or do all the things, or click on stuff, or buy shirts, or do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah, that's right.
At artfightpodcast.com. And we appreciate everybody listening and watching. And if you are watching, please do the subscribe thing or the like thing or whatever all the things are, because we have a long way to go to transition our listening audience to video.
Mm-hmm. And you can find Art Fight Podcast. We've got our own channel on YouTube. We got our own page on Facebook. We're our own page on Instagram, our own thing on Twitter, besides our own personal thing. So, if you've been enjoying the show, like Brian's saying, like, follow, like, subscribe, it helps us a lot. And we would appreciate it very much. And if you follow me on Instagram or Twitter, like, send me a little DM and I'll make sure to follow you back. I don't always, when people, it's a weird thing on Twitter. I don't know if it's my settings or what, but people will follow me. And if I'm not already following them, it won't necessarily tell me that this person's now following me. So I try to keep up with folks, but if you're a fan of the show, just say, hey, and I'll be sure to follow you back.
Excellent. All right. Well, Joe, I'll see you in the green room momentarily, but for everybody else, we're out. We appreciate it, and we will talk to you soon. Peace.